Good afternoon, everyone. Mayor Buckley here. We're in the mayor's office again. It's Monday, April the 3rd, about 1 o'clock, and I'm here with Tim and Phil Greganis has joined us. Today, we're going to do a different type of podcast. Three weeks ago, we did a podcast with the Compliance Division, and it was very well received. And I wanted to invite Phil to come in, and I want to talk about our sanitary sewer system. A lot of times you don't think about this system because you can't see it. And you go at your home, especially you go to the bathroom or take a shower, you expect the water to go down, but what happens if it doesn't? So there's a lot of things that we need to talk about with the sewer system, and there's nobody. I was on the fire department 30 years and I've been mayor 11 years. There's nobody that knows more about our sanitary sewer system than Phil Greganis. So we depend on Phil. We pick his brain about solutions to problems that we have and how we deal with our aging infrastructure. So I've given Phil a series of questions that I want to talk about and give him free rein to give you an honest opinion of the status of our sanitary sewer system and the history of it. So we want to go ahead and get started. And Phil, the city became a city in 1906, but that doesn't mean we had a sewer system. Your earliest knowledge or recollection of when we actually had a sewer system?
Okay, I think they built a small plant in Sarah Bolton Park back in the 1930s. It was very small and it was very limited in what it could do. It probably cleaned the water somewhat, but nowhere near as the expectations that we have today's discharges. And then in 1955, as the city grew, they found the need for a bigger plant, and they financed that plant. It was built in 1955. It cost $680,000. They financed it, I believe, for 30 years, and I think they tore it down and had to pay 3 more years after they tore it down to retire the bonds on it. It was state of the art at the time, but it soon became too small as the city grew, and I think Amtrak at one time had their own private treatment plant, and they did away with that, so they began discharging into the city sewer system too. In that complex where the wastewater treatment plant was, they also had a 3-story building called a digester building, and that was designed to be a large garbage disposal. It was 3 floors high, and the garbage trucks came in at the top level, dumped their load into a large vault, and it was ground up and added to the sewage, and the thought was that it would be an economical way to dispose of garbage as well, but it soon clogged up and had to be abandoned. So that was a short-lived feature of that plant, but that's when that plant was built, 1955.
I remember when the treatment plant was down in the park, and I remember when I was on the fire department back in the early 80s when we had to get fuel for the ambulance. We'd drive down there to where the plant was, and we would fuel our vehicle up. But Phil, do you have any recollection or knowledge of when we actually closed that plant?
We closed it in approximately 1979. There were 2 large interceptor lines that were put in with federal funding and then local funds also. It was used to build large interceptor lines that the city connected to in lieu of bringing all that water to the old plant. What the city got into was they needed a larger plant. The city of Indianapolis needed one, Greenwood needed one, I think Lawrence needed one. We were all applying for the same grants with the EPA to to get help to build plants, and the EPA stepped up and said, we're not going to finance a bunch of small plants. You need to all work together, build one plant, and work together to bring your sewage there. That's why those interceptor lines got put in, and that's why the Southport Road treatment plant got built. Beech Grove was more or less forced into a relationship with the city of Indianapolis to dispose of our wastewater in that way.
That was, and Phil brings up a very important point, because we used to treat our own wastewater, and then the city of Indianapolis began treating our wastewater. I think, Phil, and you can comment on this, that's when we lost our say.
Absolutely. We were forced into a marriage where Indianapolis could call all the shots, more or less. When things needed improved at the treatment plant, we were forced to help fund them, and it was not the best situation. We were not on the same page on a lot of issues. We felt maybe they were gouging us, and they probably thought the same of us, so it was not a very good relationship.
Beech Grove went from owning our own wastewater plant to having the city of Indianapolis treat our wastewater, and then the city of Indianapolis sold the wastewater utility to Citizens Energy. Phil, any recollection on when that happened?
It was about 2011.
And one of our arguments was we never retrieved any benefit from that, because the Citizens Energy paid Indianapolis, and we should have, in my opinion, is we should have received some of that money, because we paid into that from the city of Indianapolis. So does that make sense?
I agree, because we helped finance and fund the Southport Road treatment plant, as well as those large diameter interceptor lines that came through Marion County and picked up Beech Grove sewage. Those were all assets that moved from ownership by the city of Indianapolis to Citizens Energy Group. And you would think, us being a partner, some of that funding should have trickled down to us.
I agree with you. Yeah. Do you, as a result of Citizens taking over in 2011, do you feel like now we're in 2023, through 2029, do you feel that the cost of treating wastewater is going to continuously rise?
There's no question. Rate structure has already been approved by the IURC. Citizens has approval to raise those rates each year. It's there's no avoiding it. It's just going to keep going up, and one of the biggest things they have to fund, the EPA forced, at the time it was City of Indianapolis, to build the big deep tunnel to store wastewater during high flows to keep it from overflowing into the White River and other streams. So in order to finance that, Citizens had a rate structure, and we're a part of it, and they're just going to keep raising it to meet their obligations.
I think it's and Phil's touched on this already, I think it's really important for those viewing to understand that when you completely surround the city of Beech Grove, everything is being treated by Citizens Energy. And Phil mentioned a little while ago, their main interceptor lines run right through the city of Beech Grove. So it only makes sense, in my opinion, that we work with Citizens Energy. Recently, Phil, we were a year into this. Now, folks, Citizens Energy Group does all of our maintenance and responses for backups that we have. And that's been going on for about a year. Phil, your take on it, is that working out?
It's working great, because we were in a situation where our old jet truck, which we used to open blockages, is a 1990. It's on its last legs. We don't have a TV truck. And in today's world, you need both to adequately clean sewer lines and know what's going on. You can't shoot up a line with a root saw without having a TV truck there to know what you're doing. And our history was you couldn't afford to buy that equipment and use it as little as we would use it and keep it in storage until you absolutely need it. If you're going to buy that equipment, you need to use it all the time, and Beech Grove wasn't big enough to justify that purchase. So we tried to go along with contractors, but what we got into is so many of these sewer contractors get big contracts with cities or towns and things, and they're not available when you need them. So there was no process in place to immediately meet the needs of the people if there's a blockage in a main. So we gave it a lot of thought, and we decided if Citizens is completely surrounding us, they're right here, they've got the equipment, they've got the technology and the TV truck and the vac trucks. So that's why we chose them as a partner in the maintenance field. That was our only step short of selling it, and we weren't successful in our efforts to sell it. So that's the position we're in now, and we're using them for the maintenance.
Over the last year, since Citizens has taken over maintenance, we've had approximately 23, 24 calls for backups. And of those 23, 24 calls, only about 4 or 5 were actual main backups. The rest of them were as a result of a bad lateral. And we want residents to understand that most backups are caused by clogged laterals. Phil, what's the leading cause of laterals to fail?
Initially, it'll be tree roots. Tree roots will get in the old clay pipe and continue to grow. People that have that tree there will typically start having to have their lateral cleaned once a year. Then it'll escalate to every 6 months because the roots just keep getting bigger, and they can nip them off, but the roots get bigger and they're more prolific. They want all that water in the sewer pipe, so they're very aggressive. So that's what is the number one cause with the clay pipes. And then you also have bad installations where people chose excavators or plumbers that weren't the best, and I've seen some of these laterals have reverse slope. They choose to build a house with a basement. They don't investigate how deep the city's main is, and they build their basement or build their house, and then all of a sudden they're stuck with making a sewer work that doesn't have adequate fall. So there's almost no protection in the event of a backup. But that's the number one cause is roots, and then just bad installations.
I know I'm very paranoid about it, and I get my lateral cleaned out at least once a year because it's very deep in my backyard, and my lateral runs underneath my garage. So I'm really in trouble if I have to replace my lateral. This is not a question, but Phil, over the last 3 or 4 years, we hired a company called Duke Root Control, and they come out and they treat roots, believe it or not, that are in our system. Phil lays out a map of where they should go to treat tree roots. And you want to expand on that any, Phil?
Yeah, it's been a pretty successful program because they do give us a 1-year warranty. If we have a backup, they'll treat the line for free. But it doesn't take rocket science to drive down an alley or the front of a street. If you know where the sewer mains are, you can pretty much identify where there's going to be root trouble. Obviously, it's where there's trees. So we've used Dukes. They come in and they put a foam down the manhole with a large hose, and then they slowly pull it back, and it fills the entire pipe with a herbicide that kills the roots. The biggest thing with that system is, and this is our biggest problem, we've lined a lot of our sewers. That keeps the roots out of our line, but so many people have laterals where the roots get in there, they grow down the sewer, and they dangle out into our main. And the worst part is if people don't maintain that lateral, those roots get in our main and will cause our main to back up, affecting their neighbors. So we periodically use Dukes to treat those lines too, where we have a history of the laterals being the problem with the roots coming down them.
If a homeowner has a plumber come out and they realize that the lateral is bad, if it fails, who is responsible for making the repair or replacement?
In Beech Grove, the homeowner or property owner is responsible for the lateral from the house all the way to the city's main. That includes anything under the right-of-way, under a pavement, under an alley, but that's the way the policy is in Beech Grove. One of the benefits people in Beech Grove would have had the city sold to Citizens Energy Group or one of the other bidders, their policy was where the lateral enters the right-of-way, Citizens picked that up and would pay for the cost of that repair on the right-of-way. But that would be a very, very expensive program to start here in Beech Grove.
I know, Phil, in my alley over on North 6, between North 6 and North 7, that main is about 20 feet in the ground.
You can have one really deep, depending on the role of the land. If you're in that on the high side of an area, your lateral is going to be far deeper than somebody on the lower side.
And then going back on that question, the city or the city would not have any cost to pay for. That would be up to the resident to pay for.
Yes, and it's a hard pill for people to swallow, and a lot of times I'm the one that has to give them the bad news, and it's not a very nice thing to have to tell people. While we're talking about laterals, I also might mention that if you're going to buy a house in Beech Grove or anywhere else, if it's got an old clay line, no matter what you do as far as inspections, have that lateral inspected prior to the sale. So many times I've seen people buy an old house and within weeks, months, they'll have a sewer backup, they'll find out their lateral's bad, and they'll be faced with a $10,000 bill to replace their lateral in a lot of instances. I've seen it, and it's heartbreaking because people, they finally save up enough money to buy a house, and then they get into that situation. It's very sad. So anybody buying a house should always have the sewer lateral televised to make sure it's in good shape, and if it is not, then it's the time to negotiate its replacement with the current owner.
I know that, and it's not a question, but I think it's really important what Phil just said. If you are replacing a lateral in Beech Grove, whoever is doing it should get a permit from the city. And what that does, that triggers inspections, and you'll see Phil out there. And what we want to do is we want to make sure the installation is right. We want to make sure that the connection to the main is right. So it's important that whoever does your lateral replacement gets a permit, and so Phil can go out and make an inspection before they cover it all up to make it right. So I think that's a very important point. Sometimes, Phil, we hear announcements about sump pumps and drains being tied to the sanitary sewer system. And these should be detached. Could you give us some input on why you shouldn't connect to the sewer?
They definitely should not be connected to the sanitary sewer. Sump pumps can really rob the system of its capacity. If there's an 8-inch diameter sewer main serving your neighborhood, if 3 houses on that have sump pumps, studies have shown those 3 houses can rob the capacity of a sewer. And once the pipe is full, that's when you start getting backups into the homes of the lowest elevations. Another problem that plagues Beech Grove is so many of the older homes that were built prior to 1970 had foundation drains, or what they call perimeter drains, and that's a pipe system that goes around the outside of the basement wall. Those were tied to the sanitary sewer, and they thought all it would do is dilute the sewage, but it quickly became a fact that those functioned really well as field tile do, and brought that water into the sanitary sewer system and overloaded it. So when we find those during a sewer replacement, those have to be disconnected too. So that's a big source of water entering our system that's clear water, and it shouldn't be paid for to be treated, but because of the system we have, that's one of the problems we have.
Recently, the city did a sewer rehab project in the area of Grovewood Drive and Grovewood Place, where they restored a sanitary sewer line by disconnecting a stormwater drain. Can you elaborate on that, Phil?
Yeah, that connection took place about 20 years ago, and at the time, the mayor, who was in office at the time, got with a contractor, and they thought they'd solve a drainage problem there on Grovewood Place that's in a floodplain by rerouting the storm drains that couldn't handle all the water directly into a sanitary sewer manhole. That's finally been corrected. So for the last 20 years, we've been paying either the city of Indianapolis or Citizens Energy Group to treat literally water coming off the street that was intended to go into the creek nearby, but became a source of water into our sanitary sewer system. So we did get that corrected this year.
Getting ready to proceed with the generator out there. So Citizens is going to come in and do their thing, but I am trying to get a.
We have an aging system, and with the work that has been done, will the system still collect groundwater?
There's no avoiding it, unfortunately. You can reduce it by little measures all along the way. And that's one of the things we're doing now, is addressing some manhole lids that have open pick holes that are a source of water entering our system, and we're going to line some manholes that seals them all up so that the groundwater doesn't come in the old brick joints. We're going to reduce the infiltration, but you're never going to get all of it stopped. There's so many miles of laterals that leak, and then the foundation problem, or foundation drain problem, it's a big source. And although we've lined lines, the water gets behind the liner and flows between the liner and the old pipe, and eventually comes out where there's laterals. So there's just all kinds of places where groundwater still can get in.
Any guess, Phil, on the percentage of groundwater that the residents treat?
If we have a really rainy month, our flows will double. So if you have, like recently we had a March where we treated 80 million gallons of water, and if we hadn't had so much rain during this March, it would have been closer to 40 million. So you've got almost 100% jump during wet weather.
Ouch.
Yeah.
And the residents of Beech Grove are paying for that, whereas if we weren't in the sanitary sewer utility business, you would only be paying for the water that you use in your home. You wouldn't be paying for groundwater treatment. But the way it is now, we pay for all water that is in the system. So it's very unfortunate. And I wanted to double back on a point that was made earlier. Back about 4 or 5 years ago, I recommended to the city council that we sell the sanitary sewer system. I was met with a rather large remonstrance. I never took it to a vote because it would not pass. I think that anyone who deals with the sanitary sewer utility daily understands why I brought that forward, and to this day I still feel that we should not be in the sanitary sewer utility business. Phil, your thoughts as someone who knows this system better than anyone else?
Well, I have to totally agree with you. Brad Merriweather, the Director of Public Works, and I both saw the folly in trying to be the middleman in the sewer business, where we collect money from the residents of Beech Grove and then we have to pay citizens, and it's only being done to get the funding for the what they call pilot, payment in lieu of taxes, and ROI, return on investment. They were two, I'll call them schemes, where cities started collecting a little bit more money than they should for sewer services, and then they took those funds and sent them out to other parts of the city to pay for things that they couldn't afford to with property taxes. And each year, all it did was reduce the amount of maintenance you could do on your system. You couldn't buy the equipment you needed, you couldn't line things, you couldn't rehab manholes, but you could maybe buy a piece of playground equipment or a fire truck with those funds that should have gone and stayed in the utility. But because of the tax rate that the state mandated, cities looked for ways to get funding, and the sewer systems became a cash cow, and it has been a political football ever since. That's why the city of Indianapolis sold their system. They never had the courage, the city council people of the city of Indianapolis, to raise rates when they should. They found the best way was to have a private company like Citizens run the sewer system in a professional manner instead of running it in a way that you were just taking money and spending it on other things than the sewer system.
The city, when I became mayor, the sewer utility was paying the city over $700,000 a year to supplement the operating budget of the city. And that $700,000 would not go to the sewer utility. Well, over the last, and it's hard once you start doing that, it's hard to get out of that practice. So what we've had to do is over the last 11 years, that has been reduced from 700,000, and now this year it will be 400,000. So we've cut $300,000 out of it, but we still have a ways to go. So the council over the next 4 or 5 years is going to have to continue to reduce that figure to where now that money can be put back into the sewer utility to maintain the system. So I like the work that we have done on it. We have done a lot of projects over the past 11 years. We're doing a very, very detailed project this year, and I wanted Phil to talk briefly about Main Street from 13th to 18th. So can you?
Okay, we've got some funding from the American Rescue Plan that the City Council chose to use for sanitary sewer improvements, and we're going to line and improve about 100 manholes, and then we're also going to line a 24-inch line that runs from 13th up to 18th. it's a concrete pipe. The aggregate inside is being exposed due to the hydrogen sulfide gases that attack concrete. So we're going to get a liner in that and preserve the structure of that pipe. That has started, and the manhole work has started. They're cleaning the sewer as we speak today. But then on the manhole side, they're doing a process called Mr. Manhole, and they come in and they cut a 48-inch diameter circle around the existing manhole, and they lift that plug out, and they go down about 12 inches. They remove the existing manhole cover and frame. They put a new cover and frame in, and they bring it up to grade perfectly with the process of a ring saw that cuts a piece of pipe the perfect size so that the manhole ends up flush with the surface. And then they pour a concrete ring around that, and that seals the surface, and you get a lid that no longer leaks or rattles or anything like that. And then they're going to come in with a cementitious liner and line the walls, put a new bottom in the manhole too that's called a bench wall, so that the walls slope down into the trough where the sewage is, so that the sewage always leaves the manhole. And then they, after that cementitious coating is put on, they come back and put on an epoxy that will fight off the hydrogen sulfide gas and the effects of that environment on the pipes. So we're taking a big step to make improvements, but it's so expensive.
I know that we have an aging system, and from my unprofessional vision, I estimate that at least 10% of our system is over 75 years old. Would that be accurate?
Probably a little higher than that.
And I'll tell you what I worry about, Phil. I worry about getting a call from you or Brad saying we've had a catastrophic failure of our sewer system. That would be devastating.
And this manhole project is addressing some of that potential problems, because we do have some old brick manholes that are 20 feet deep. They were laid in the 1940s, built up. Whoever built them has long passed into heaven, but the environment down there is so bad that if you got the wrong brick falling out and during a big rain, you could lose a whole wall of a manhole. And if it's 20 feet deep, and some of these alleys are 15 feet wide, there's no room to dig, there's garages on both sides, it could be a very big disaster, number one. And number two is getting a contractor in who's willing to take the job on in an emergency. It's really hard to get people, and it's gotten probably 10 times worse since we've had the effects of COVID, and so many things have changed due to that. You can't get the contractors you used to. They just select things differently.
Phil, any idea on how many manholes we have in our system?
There's about 650 that we are responsible, but within Beech Grove city limits, there's about 800, because Citizens has a great number along the interceptors. And then we have some private manholes in apartment complexes and shopping centers, and in the schools, they have some of their own private ones, but about 800 total, and 650 of them are ours.
Any idea on how many miles of pipe we have buried?
It's about 48 miles of sanitary sewer pipe, and that's just our pipe, that's the mains. There's at least that much in laterals, private laterals, that are the homeowners or property owner's responsibility, and that's where you have a lot of the problems now, where we've addressed a great deal of things, but we still have more to go. But there's so many problems on private property that contribute to the infiltration.
One last question, and I hope this has helped those of you viewing get a better understanding of our system and what future administrations are going to be facing, because we have an aging system. We are going to have to increase our rates So those two things you really need to keep in mind, and the council over the next 4 or 5 years are going to have to address these matters. Phil, last question before we adjourn. Should a resident or business experience a backup, who should they call?
They need to call the dispatch center at Citizens Energy Group. They're a 317 number, 924-3311. I'll give that number again. It's 317-924-3311. If you call that number, they have what they call first responders. They're usually in a van. They take care of problems related to the water system, the natural gas system, and sewer system. So they'll send the technician out. He'll check the manholes to identify where the problem is, and if it is a backup in the city's main, they'll send out a work order. They'll get a vac truck and a crew there as quickly as possible, and get the main opened up so that service is restored.
That concludes our podcast for today, and I hope having Phil come in and explain the sanitary sewer utility will help you better understand what's going on in the city of Beech Grove and our system. You can't see it, so you just don't know what's happening. So if you have any questions for us, you can always call the mayor's office, 803-9111, or you can call out at DPW, 803-9091. You probably have to leave a message because they're in and out all day long. But anyway, this has been a very good podcast. And Phil, thank you very much for coming in today.
Appreciate it.
Great. And we'll see you at the next podcast.